listen to what you say about best way to be a liberal is to be a fighting liberal, and I'm pretty good at fighting, lots of experience, having been a high school teacher of math. But I've had two interesting confrontations, I guess, in the last few days, trying to be a speaker for a conversationalist for the Liberal Party. And one of them was in a aquafit pool where I'm getting physiotherapy, and he was getting physiotherapy. He spends 10 minutes, I spend 2 hours. The first day he was there, said, "Oh, but I'm very strong." And my physiotherapist said, "But then why are you here?" And etc. He said to me when I was speaking to my physiotherapist about how wonderful the meetings were, and she's going to join, by the way, and how the convention was just fabulous. And he said, "Oh, you're a liberal." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Ha! Like you couldn't get me to be a liberal for anything in the world." And I said, and why would that be, sir? And he said something about marijuana. Instantly, it was the marijuana thing. And I didn't know what to do. And so very coolly, I said, "Oh, you don't want to see marijuana regulated then?" And he sort of paused. And I said, what would you do with the tax dollars that you could get if you actually, sold marijuana, kept track of who was buying it, used some of it for perhaps educating our misspent youth or our misspent elderly folks? What would you do with the tax dollars? Could you reduce the deficit, do you think? And so I used it that kind of approach. And he didn't know. He was like a pit bull. And he just sort of looked at me, and I said, "Oh, by the way, did you notice that yesterday was Blue Monday, where everybody in Canada was supposed to be sad? I was really happy. How about you?" And he just got out of the pool and went into the sauna. Anyway, so that was the first one. And the second one was with my doctor today. I know I look wonderful, but really I'm going to be having surgery and so on. And I told her, I had a wonderful time at the convention, blah, blah, blah. And she said, "And what about that marijuana thing?" I said, "Why would you ask that question? You're a smart lady." And I gave her the thing. I said, "We passed, I think, 18 resolutions, not counting the constitutional ones there. And look, I mean, it isn't just about marijuana. Don't you want to see it regulated? Don't you want to see your kid not go to jail in case she smokes up one little thing, etc." And I wasn't fighting, but I got some success with her. I know that. And I think I got some with him. How do you just sort of make that work?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to understand it is a divisive issue, right? I mean, it's an issue in which people have immediate emotive reactions. The polling that I've seen, and I didn't see it before the resolution was passed, I just started looking at this more recently, shows that it's about 60-40, 65-35. Let me tell you a couple of experiences that I've had in life. When we brought in legislation in Ontario allowing for same-sex benefits for partners in 1994. The reaction in the province was huge. Our polling showed that it was very divisive. It was maybe 45% in favor, 55% opposed. Even within the 6 months that we had the debate, opinions started to shift a little bit more, 55-45 in favor, 60-40 in favor. Go around the country today and ask people whether you think that people who are gay and lesbian should be able to have their own relationships and have their own benefits, and now, since 2001, get married. When gay marriage was introduced, it was very divisive, and today it's much less divisive. So where do we want to be as liberals? We made the decision to say, we know some people find it difficult, And some people, just have an immediate emotional reaction against it. But we have to start encouraging a conversation. In the United States, on this question of the so-called war against drugs, in the United States, you now have people like Newt Gingrich and others from the far right-hand side, Ron Paul, from the libertarian sort of perspective, saying, you know what, this really isn't working. This command and control philosophy actually doesn't work. We can't actually command and control who will get married and who they will marry. We can't actually command, although on the marriage thing they're hopeless. They still haven't got the message. I don't know if any of you watch the Republican debates. If you really want to kind of give your head a shake one night, watch those debates. It's really quite a mind-blowing experience. It really is. But continuing that thought, I happen to believe very strongly that the approach that we are taking as a society on the question of soft drugs is as ineffective and wrong-headed as was the attempt to prohibit the use of alcohol. I think it makes no sense. And so it's not saying, I'm not saying that I'm not a promoter of public drunkenness. I'd say to the doctors and others who are writing in saying we're concerned, I say, let's everybody kind of just look at this thing in a practical way and say, is this really what we want to be doing with our jails and our prisons and our young people and our police? No. Or do we want to be doing something different? And if we want to do something different, we're going to have to make some changes. And how those changes will come about, let's have that dialogue, let's have that conversation. But let me tell everybody in this room, I don't think as leader, when I have 70, 77, 80% of the delegates saying, this is where we think the country needs to go, I'm not as a leader going to say, well, I know it's very controversial, and I'm not going to touch that, I'm going to change the subject and say, well, that was the delegates at a convention, and da-da-da-da-da. No. We have to persist, take this issue seriously, take it on with people, and say, let's have that dialogue and conversation. And it seems to me that is something that Canadians will respect in a political party that says, we're not afraid to take on these issues. We'll take them on.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed your speech on that, but the one question I have, I've got 5 grandchildren in school. Are we winning or losing the battle on bullying?
That's a really good question. Well, let me say this first of all, and I'm not saying it only because Chris is in the room, but I am really proud of our provincial government. I think that the Premier himself and the Cabinet have done a great job at understanding that this is an issue. And it's a real problem. The thing that makes it difficult, the bullying question more complicated today, is the digital world that we live in. We've always had bullying in schools, okay? I mean, it's not a new phenomenon, but the means that people had to communicate that were different. Kids would get beaten up in the schoolyard. We'd have, teachers would come in, do stuff, and we all went through the school system. We all understand that. But there's now something more insidious going on, and more difficult to manage, and also, frankly, more difficult to control. Because we can't simply, it isn't a matter of just a teacher standing up and saying, this has got to stop in this classroom, or a principal saying, this has got to stop in this school. They can say those things, but they can't control all the messages that the students receive, which is why cyberbullying is such an issue, why bullying on the internet is such an issue, and bullying on Facebook is such an issue, and why we see this attempts to create stereotypes. Having said all that, would you say to me, are we winning or losing? I would say we're winning. But I'll give you a couple of examples. There have always been gay kids in school. When I was a kid, people didn't know who anybody was. Nobody would come out, in high school, people didn't come out and say they were gay. I mean, I'm sure everybody's had this experience of going to a high school reunion and saying, oh yeah, Harry, I remember Harry, oh yeah, okay. Now it all makes sense. But we didn't experience it that way then, right?
No.
And so what's happening today in school with kids is people are being themselves more openly than ever before, and that's causing a reaction. And it's not just about sexual orientations, but all kinds of things. But there's always this tendency to conformity, and there's always this desire to be in the in-group and the out-group and all those things that are happening. But the more we kind of come out with the thing I like about the age we're in now is that it is much more an age of candor than ever before. I mean, there are lots more ways in which we're able to be ourselves, openly with other people. I mean, everybody knows that I like to go skinny dipping. Everybody understands that. It's no longer a secret. It used to be my well-kept secret. My kids would say, Dad, you can't do that when there are other people around. I said, I don't care. But it's really important that we, I think, recognize that we have made some progress, but particularly I want to say that the provincial government, with its responsibility for education, is really, I think, identifying the problem and saying, yes, this is a problem. We're losing kids. We're losing kids in their teenage years because they can't take it, and that's something we all have to cope with and fight against and do everything we can to stop. So the more publicly we can deal with this, the more open we can be about it, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah.
But it is still a battle. Sir.
Yes, I'd like to say I'm happy for the. I'd like to congratulate the Liberal Party on the hard weekend they just had up in Ottawa there. And looking around, judging by the crowd here, I can definitely say I feel like a minority as coming from the youth point of view and perspective. And judging by countries such as France and the Netherlands, what hope or what can you say towards the youth that really renews our faith in the way we run our country? The last 10 years, the global population has increased by 1 billion and it continues to grow exponentially. So how are we going to make sure that the youth are taken care of as well as the elderly populace with these changes happening, which we can't ignore?
First of all, you may be in a bit of a minority in this crowd, but I can tell you that if you'd come to Ottawa, you would not have been in such a minority. We had about 1,000 young people there as delegates. So. I'm glad you asked the question because we're really at a time of great change. We're at a time of when you look at the demographics, if you like, the population, it's called boom, bust, and echo, right? Well, I'm in the boom, right? I'm part of the baby boom generation. And then following on, there was a bit of a slope back. And now, of course, there's a return back up. And you're the echo. And it's a heck of an echo. In fact, the echo is even bigger in many ways than the boom. That's why if you look at the Don Tapscott speech, he'll talk about that, because he talks about how that echo generation is taking over, but also how there's some real tensions coming up when we look at the policy areas we have to focus on. I talked about how much money is being spent on healthcare, and I can always remember when I was watching a debate once during an election campaign when I was out of politics. And Mr. Martin said, the most important issue facing the country today is waiting lists for operations in hospitals. And my daughter, who's in her early 20s at that time, she said, Dad, that might be his biggest issue, but it sure isn't my biggest issue. It's important to realize that. And when we talk about aging and healthcare and the costs and drugs, you may be interested in different kinds of drug policy, but when we look at pharmaceutical drugs, for example, that's a separate issue. And when you look at what we need to look at with respect to your situation is making sure that we've got the skills and the training and the investments in education and room for the investments in what matters to your generation as much as what matters to mine. And this question of intergenerational equity, this question of fairness between generations, is really going to become an increasingly critical question. Because if the baby boom generation just takes up too much room, then we're not going to be doing what we need to do for you. Now, there are two issues I think we can look at. One of them is education and skills training, and I think we need to have a national approach on skills training. I think we need to have a national approach on support for students and for younger people getting into college and university, not just leaving all the financial burden on the backs of the provinces. You know, the province has done something progressive with respect to support for tuition in Ontario, but we've got to make sure that this is, you know, more broadly based across the country, and that it's not just limited to tuition, that it looks at the situation of kids who haven't gone on to university and college, people who are in apprenticeship programs or not yet in apprenticeship programs. How can we provide that kind of support? That's very critical for us to be able to do, very critical. Second is the environment. The environment is a classic intergenerational issue, because the people who are benefiting from the current pollution are the people in this room. And the people who will pay the price as global warming goes up, it's not even you, it's your children and your grandchildren.
I can afford to have them.
Yeah, well, that's it. So here are the issues that are coming. Making sure you've got a job, making sure you've got access to work, making sure you've got access to the same possibilities, that housing doesn't become unaffordable, that having a good life doesn't become unaffordable. And that's why the Caterpillar issue is such a key issue. Because if the only work that's going to be available for people is paying 12 or 14 or 16 bucks an hour, it's going to be part-time, it's going to be in and out, you're going to be in and out of the workforce, it's really creating a gap between, you know, those who've kind of got in, the drawbridge has gone up and said, well, good luck, we can't live like that. And that's why it's so important for us to break down these barriers and to engage, because one of the big problems is the participation rate in politics of people under the age of 30 is so small compared to the participation rate of people who are over the age of 70. And you want to understand why some political debates get skewed in one direction rather than the other. You know, we could be facing a time in 20 or 25 years when a group of, you know, older people will say, well, the big issue now is the cost of health care. Oh, and by the way, cost of funerals, cost of all that stuff. People are going to say, well, wait a minute, what about, if you're not participating in the debate, it's not going to happen. You've got to make it happen. And don't wait for me to tell you what the problems are, and don't wait for me to provide you with the solutions. You tell me what the solutions are. And that's where the debate has to grow, and that's where we have to engage Canadians about saying, don't wait around for somebody in Ottawa to say, here's the answer. Tell us what the answers are.
Other countries have those answers.
Other countries have them, and other countries have made some greater progress than we have, and other countries, frankly, are also falling far behind as well. You look at the European countries right now, you say, yeah, they have very generous social programs. They also have massive public debt. And that's a problem that, frankly, every generation has to pay for. We have to figure out a way to do that. Sir.
First off, I want to thank you for your time on the line and your time spent here. The question is not towards policy. Policy is very important, but the systemic issues that faced in Parliament, when you look at party discipline, all of the closure that has been used, the way committees are ran, prevents from the policies that are good from having any longevity. I personally believe that until we face the problems of the old political system that was put in place for 100 years ago with something that is more adaptive to today's issues without making it a control and conquer thing where committee members are shut down from actually contributing to bills properly, or you have to vote and toe the party line. If you could speak on that, I would appreciate it.
Well, I think you've raised some really critical issues. Let me try to give you a short answer and say you're absolutely talking about the right things. We did talk at the convention about the need to look at a better electoral system, so it's not winner take all. So we begin to see that there's going to be a fair representation in Parliament. I'm a big believer that free votes should be free votes. If you came to our convention, you'd see this was not a tightly controlled convention where the leader said this is what everyone's going to do, and you had people walking the floor and saying, here's where we're going to be whipped in this way or whipped. None of that went on. And somebody said to me, what do you think is going to happen this weekend? I said, I have no idea. It should be fun. Let's just see what happens. You know, I mean, you hope good things will happen. I intervened in one debate because I wanted to open up the party, and I didn't want anybody to think that I wasn't interested in the result. I was very interested in the result because I think we have to open up this party. I think we really have to open it up. But with respect to how we could carry on in Parliament, you're absolutely right. I mean, we under Mr. Harper, Mr. Harper it's the command and control agenda.
If I could ask you not to specifically put it to Harper, because the way the system is, it's any prime minister that's in that position.
No, not necessarily. It's worse now than it's ever been.
Well, he may be abusing his powers to do certain things. My issue is with the ability of those powers there to be used.
We need to limit the power of the Prime Minister. We need to expand the role of committees in the House of Commons. We need to allow for more free votes. We need to make it clear that if the government is defeated on a bill that is not a confidence matter, not a budgetary matter, people need to be able to free to vote the way they want to vote. And we need to be able to move in that direction to create a greater degree of openness in Parliament, and we need to allow people to express their opinions and their consciences more effectively in Parliament. And that's a direction that we need to move in. And that's part of a broader democratic package that we have to present to the Canadian people in the next election. And understand that we're going to be bound by it. That, we're not going to just say these things, but having said them, you're going to have to say, okay, this is how it's going to work. And it is going to require some change. We've seen that happen in periods of minority government where there has been more, collaboration and more discussion. Premier Peterson and I, in 1985, that's 27 years ago. I keep reminding myself. Okay? Probably before you were born, maybe.
Nah, 5 years after.
5 years after. Oh, wow. Okay. You're an old guy already. We agreed on an agenda. We agreed 2 years, no parliamentary games. We agreed that committees would be able to do their jobs. We agreed that there would be votes in Parliament that if they led to a defeat of the government on a motion or on a bill, it would only produce a crisis of confidence if it was in fact a budgetary confidence matter. We agreed on all those things. And if you can agree on them in a minority parliament, why can't you agree on them in a majority parliament? There's no reason why you couldn't agree to them. So I've already got my name on a document that says that's what I've agreed to. So I have no problem agreeing to it again. It's very, very critical to do it. And as Yogi Berra once said, it ain't boasting if you've done it. So we've done it, so let's get it done.